The elevated emotions of love, joy, of trust, of knowingness, of gratitude, they begin to produce 1,300 new chemicals that begin to heal the immune system. If you can't stop your anger, then you're addicted. Valid or not, justified or not. If you can't stop your sadness, then you must be addicted to those chemicals. But those chemicals only last for 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Which means, I tell my kids this all the time. Well, they're older, but when they were younger. If you're angry for more than 2 minutes, you're faking it. So, when you open your heart, you're selfless. When you're in that creative state, you're not defined by things, you're not defined by your body, you're not defined by time. We know this, we've studied it in the brain thousands of times. A creative person forgets that they even have a body. They forget about the things and people in their life, they forget about time. They're in the creative state. And my definition of creation is when you forget about yourself. You go from selfish to selfless. And that's when you're at your best. We've proved it thousands of times. Of course, energy is created. There's always growth and repair. People tend to go from a narrow focus to possibility, to an open focus. They feel connected to their vision. They feel connected to people. They feel connected to something greater. They're already defining reality beyond their senses. They're living no longer as a victim, which means most people think unconsciously that their personal reality is creating their personality. If your personal reality is creating your personality, then you're a victim. But if your personality is creating your personal reality, you're a creator. So now they're causing an effect. They're no longer living by cause and effect. They see possibilities. Brain and heart are in a state of coherence and balance. And of course, they crave the unknown. They want the experience. They want the adventure. They live for it. What is the simple definition of quantum? Quantum physics says that your mind and matter are so intimately connected that it's impossible to separate the two. That matter has a mind, and mind is in matter. And you can't pull them apart. And so, Newtonian physics, the world we live in, is the physics of the predictable. Okay, we're going to shoot a rocket to the moon. We need to know the distance, we need to know the speed, and because we can figure out all of those elements, we could say that Newtonian physics, we can predict where we're going. We can predict how much time it takes. But the quantum model of reality is about the unpredictable. It's about this place of uncertainty. And so in quantum physics, it's amazing because when they started studying the very tiny particles in atoms, like electrons and photons, they expected that those particles would behave like planets rotating around the sun. Predictably, but they don't. They respond to mind. And so now, all of a sudden, the quantum physicist comes along to measure the electron. And the electron goes from a wave of possibility, and all that energy collapses into a particle, and it's called collapsing the wave function. They turn their back and no longer look and observe the electron, and it turns back into energy. So mind is affecting matter. So, I have drank martinis with quantum physicists till sunrise, hundreds of times. And they always say, well, the observer effect works really well for the tiny, small subatomic particles, but not for the very large. And I always say the same thing to them. Yeah, the observer does work for the very tiny and not for the very large. But what if we're poor observers? What if we can get better at observation? In other words, if you wake up every morning and you do the same thing that you've been doing for the last 10 years, then you're caught in the predictable world of Newtonian physics. And if you're doing the same thing over and over again, we can take your past and lift it up and set it on your future, and it's going to be exactly the same. So then if you're viewing your life from the same level of mind every single day, then you are collapsing the same possibilities into the same reality. So if you teach people then to find the present moment, in quantum physics, all possibilities exist in the present moment. But most people's brains are anticipating the future based on the past, and they're not present. So then it requires training. It requires people retreating from their lives and practicing finding the present moment and beginning to change their habits and their thoughts and their behaviors.
A habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. So if you think about it, people wake up in the morning, they begin to think about their problems. Those problems are circuits of memories in the brain. Each one of those memories are connected to people and things at certain times and places. And if the brain is a record of the past, the moment they start their day, they're already thinking in the past. Each one of those memories has an emotion. Emotions are the end product of past experiences. So the moment they recall those memories of their problems, they all of a sudden feel unhappy, they feel sad, they feel pain. Now, how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So the person's entire state of being when they start their day is in the past. So what does that mean? The familiar past will sooner or later be predictable future. So if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, and you can't think greater than how you feel, or feelings have become the means of thinking, by very definition of emotions, you're thinking in the past. And for the most part, you're going to keep creating the same life. I think that the bigger thing is that we keep firing and wiring those circuits. They become more hardwired. So you have a thought, and then the program runs. But it's the emotion that follows the thought. If you have a fearful thought, you're going to feel anxiety. The moment you feel anxiety, your brain's checking in with your body and saying, yeah, you're pretty anxious. So then you start thinking more corresponding thoughts equal to how you feel. Well, the redundancy of that cycle conditions the body to become the mind. So now, when it comes time to change, the person steps into that river of change and they make a different choice, and all of a sudden, they don't feel the same way. So the body says, well, you've been doing this for 35 years. You're going to just stop suffering and stop feeling guilty and stop feeling shameful, and you're not going to complain or blame or make excuses or feel sorry for yourself. Well, the body's in the unknown. So the body says, I want to return back to familiar territory. So the body starts influencing the mind, and it says, start tomorrow. You're too much like your mother. You'll never change. This isn't going to work for you. This doesn't feel right. And so if you respond to that thought as if it's true, that same thought will lead to the same choice, which will lead to the same behavior, which will create the same experience, which will produce the same emotion. The stronger the emotional reaction you have to some experience in your life, the higher the emotional quotient, the more you pay attention to the cause. And the moment the brain puts all of its attention on the cause, it takes a snapshot. And that's called a memory. So long-term memories are created from very highly emotional experiences. So what happens then is that people think neurologically within the circuitry of that experience, and they feel chemically within the boundaries of those emotions. And so when you have an emotional reaction to someone or something, most people think that they can't control their emotional reaction. Well, it turns out if you allow that emotional reaction, it's called a refractory period, to last for hours or days, that's called a mood. I say to someone, hey, well, what's up? They say, I'm in a mood. Well, why are you in a mood? Well, I had this thing happen to me 5 days ago, and I'm having one long emotional reaction. If you keep that same emotional reaction going on for weeks or months, that's called temperament. Why is he so bitter? I don't know, let's ask him. Why is he so bitter? Why are you bitter? Well, I had this thing happen to me 9 months ago. And if you keep that same emotional reaction going on for years on end, that's called a personality trait. And so learning how to shorten your refractory period of emotional reactions is really where the work starts. So then people, when they have an event, what they do is they keep recalling the event, because the emotions of stress hormones, the survival emotions, are saying pay attention to what happened, because you want to be prepared if it happens again. So as you become familiar with the thoughts, the behaviors, and the emotions of the old self, you're retiring that old self. As you fire and wire new thoughts and condition the body into a new emotional state, if you do that enough times, it'll begin to become familiar to you. So it's so important, just like a garden. If you're planting a garden, you got to get rid of the weeds. You got to take the plants from the past year and you got to pull them out. The rocks that sift to the top that are like our emotional blocks, they have to be removed. The soil has to be tenderized and broken down. We have to make room to plant a new garden. So primarily, we learn the most about ourselves and others when we're uncomfortable. All organisms in nature can tolerate short-term stress. You know, a deer gets chased by a pack of coyotes. When it outruns the coyotes, it goes back to grazing and the event is over. And the definition of stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance, out of homeostasis. The stress response is what the body innately does to return itself back to order. So you're driving down the road, someone cuts you off, you jam on the brakes, you give them the finger, and then you settle back down and the event is over and boom, now everything's back to normal. But what if it's not a predator that's waiting for you outside the cave, but what if it's your coworker sitting right next to you, and all day long you're turning on those chemicals because they're pushing all your emotional buttons. When you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for disease, because no organism in nature can live in emergency mode for that extended period of time. It's a scientific fact that the hormones of stress downregulate genes and create disease, long-term effects. Human beings, because of the size of the neocortex, we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. We can think about our problems and turn on those chemicals. That means then our thoughts could make us sick. So if it's possible that our thoughts could make us sick, is it possible then our thoughts could make us well? And the answer is absolutely yes.